So it is Friday, June 30th, 2023, and the United States' wildfire season is still virtually silent. Meanwhile, here in Baltimore, there is a haze. If you're not up to it yet, the rumors are Canada may begin to start requesting contractors. And there's also a rumor that the Canadian government is going to allow firefighters and wildfire medics that have been requested to cross the Canadian border via ground, not by air, just by ground, but with no or an expired passport. And the US will allow re-entry with no problems, but we'll wait and see how that goes. So as a wildfire paramedic, one of the things I like to do is familiarize myself with the area I'm supposed to be getting sent to, and I take that responsibility very seriously. And with that, one of the things I like to do is conduct my own threat assessment, but beyond the obvious. More so the things of what are the native poisonous plants in the area, what are the native dangerous wildlife, the altitude you're going to be operating at, and things like that. The more and more of these threat assessments that I do, I realized I'm from the East Coast, and our things that are dangerous here are somewhat limited in comparison when you start looking around the country or other parts of the world. Most specifically, you guys on the western part of the country, every single thing out there is looking to hurt you or kill you. It's unreal. So early on, I was pretty naive as to what actually existed. For the purposes of this video, we're going to be focused on things that contain venom. Pretty much snakes.
I have had it with these motherfucking snakes on this motherfucking plane.
So like I said, I'm from the East Coast. My work history as a New York City firefighter, Jersey City paramedic, Washington, D.C. firefighter paramedic. These snake bites and scorpion things, the things we really concern ourselves with are whether or not there's an envenomation that occurred or not, and we'll get more into that in a minute. But I didn't really consider these as a threat, much less encounter them in the field. So when I started getting sent out west to go to some of these larger incidents and actually firsthand encountering and seeing rattlesnakes, I began to do some extensive familiarization in best practices within my scope as a paramedic. So wildfires specifically, but all disasters for that matter, are inexorably linked to injury and illness. While we're operating, no matter the environment that we're in, we're expected to provide advanced physiological care. The austerity of these environments that we're operating in simply add to the complexity of providing high-level critical care because resources are limited. And we, as these pre-hospital care providers, are asked to fill some unexpected roles just out of the necessity of the situation. So I was putting all this together, I had to come up with a places to say, hey, where do I actually start? If you're doing a pre-plan and doing a familiarization of a region, the WHO and DOD both have great resources readily available. And while neither is complete, they're almost complementary of each other, and where one kind of lacks in some of the detail, the other one picks right up. I'll put links to both of those in the description. Secondly, let's get into a dry bite versus a wet bite. So a dry bite is a bite from a venomous animal, but it didn't release any venom. And why wouldn't an animal do that? Understand, the venom that's in these snakes and whatnot is not meant to kill people. It is designed for feeding.
He doesn't. He's such an idiot.
You are a psycho.
So it's simply, if it senses prey and it can eat you, when it bites you, it injects its venom, and it's simply just to kill that animal that thinks it can eat. A snake generally doesn't think it can kill you, so there are instances where no venom is released, and that's a dry bite. Now, with that, you can still get bleeding, inflammation, swelling, and infection to include tetanus. So obviously, vice versa, in a wet bite, venom has been injected. There was an envenomation that occurred. Now, if you don't know what kind of bite occurred or you don't know which snake bit somebody, it's okay. The important thing is that we observe these people, at least for 24 hours, because if there was venom injected, if there was an envenomation, the person will eventually get worse. They will eventually show signs and symptoms, so careful evaluation is of utmost importance. So as far as the three main types of venom goes, you have cytotoxins, neurotoxins, and hemotoxins. In kind of the order of what can kill you the quickest to what takes the longest, neurotoxins we're going to start with. Most importantly, these spread lymphatically, which basically just means it surrounds all body tissue. Extra fluid from your tissues in the body drains into and then flow through your small lymph vessels. This fluid is then filtered through the lymph nodes and then into the bloodstream. This is exactly why we don't apply tourniquets to snake bites anymore. Once we learned how this toxins actually spread, we realized tourniquets aren't really going to help, so there will be a no-go. We'll get more into that in a little bit. Next up, you have your hemotoxins. These simply cause the destruction of red blood cells or induce blood coagulation. Cytotoxins are third on our list, and this venom is not as deadly as neurotoxins or hemotoxins, but number one, they simply kill cells, and however, secondary injuries from these, such as limb function and other disabilities, often result from cytotoxic venom. So let's get into the assessment techniques utilized for evaluating these type of injuries. According to the Sonoma Ecology Center, 85% of snake bites occur to the hand or fingers. 13% occur to the feet and legs, but rarely above the ankle do the snake bites occur. So as far as our evaluations go for these, there's a good guide that can help you called the Snake Bite Severity Score. It's a PDF. I'll put the link in the description below. But this will help you keep a systematic approach to evaluating these patients. So according to Johns Hopkins Medicine, and if you think about those percentages we just talked about, statistically, it just makes sense. We should start evaluation at the most distal end of the extremity that was bitten and then work our way proximal. And while you're doing so, go ahead and remove any constrictive clothing, watches, rings, just because there's probably going to be swelling that occurs if there was an envenomation. Before we take this any further, it's hot and humid out here. I'm dying. Before we go deeper into the evaluation and then further into the treatments, I'm going to head home, get into the air conditioning, and we'll go from there. Okay, it's much better, it's much cooler here. So, now that we're getting our hands on these patients, the first thing we're going to do almost falls in line a little bit with the assessment, but we're going to say for simulation purposes, I took a bite here to the left hand. We already said as we're doing our first initial assessment, we're starting distal, working proximal on the extremity. We're going to remove any rings, watches, anything that could be constricted. Then we're going to draw a circle with a marker around the bite area and the initial reaction, and we'll mark the time. So right now, it's 18:52. So there we got that marked. After this, we're going to give it, I don't know, a period of time, 15, 30, 45 minutes. Anything you notice, if you see something going on, we want to mark it again. I like to use a dotted line this time, and we're going to draw a circle around the progression of what we are seeing to see if that venom is flowing through and if we're having a reaction to it. And then we'll mark the time that we took those readings. While you're doing all this, you're looking for the clues to help you determine which type of toxin it was. If it's a cytotoxin, you're going to be looking for your blistering, necrosis, swelling. Obviously, you're probably going to have pain at the injury site no matter what. But then if it's a hemotoxin, you're going to be looking for disproportionate or abnormal bleeding. Because these things spread linearly, you're going to be looking for, as the venom or toxin would move up your arm, look for old scabs or any old wounds that are scabbed over, and look for them to start bleeding for no reason. That's the toxin doing its work if it's a hemotoxin. We're going to keep checking up, and then we'd be looking for enlarged or tender lymph nodes in the armpit, or if it was in the leg, up in the thigh. So we then want to keep working that assessment up. We're going to look and do a mouth check, look for bleeding gums, and then finally see if they're complaining of any double vision. If it's a neurotoxin we're dealing with, if we're dealing with a neurotoxicity, these people are going to need end-tidal CO2 monitoring or serial arterial blood gases, if you can manage that, just to keep an eye out for pending respiratory acidosis. If you are suspecting a neurotoxin, these people need consistent or neurological checks to watch for the progression of the toxin. In addition to that, we also want to be checking for bilateral ptosis, which is just a droopiness of the eyelids with dilated pupils, and or they could also be having some respiratory distress, which would be a huge red flag. So getting into the actual putting our hands on this person, doing the treatment, I'm going to start with some what not to do's. First off, we already said, tourniquet, get rid of it. Not here. All that's going to do is concentrate the venom in a certain area. And venom is just a cocktail of toxins. And it will just have devastating results if you keep it all in a certain area. It'll be awful. Cold packs. Don't do those either, because what's it do? Causes vasoconstriction. You're basically putting a tourniquet on and it's doing the exact same thing. Again, you're going to concentrate all those toxins in a small area and have a devastating results on your patient.
If everything you're doing is bad, I want you to know this.
So what if the venom is hemotoxic and our patient is going into hemorrhagic shock? Can we use TXA? Well, the answer is no, because that venom operates on a different mechanism and the TXA would do nothing. So I can't afford to throw an iPad. I thought about it. So as far as venom extractors go, according to the NIH, there's only been 2 abstracts done and they do show support in using them. However, those abstracts haven't been peer reviewed, and in them they only did a limited description of their methodology. In getting into what actions to actually take in dealing with these, so my local protocols advocated up until recently to still go and try to capture the snake if possible to bring with you to the hospital. That's obviously not a good idea. I don't know when that was ever thought to be a good idea, because snakes can actually look like they're dead, and even if they are dead, still cause an envenomation if they were to, somehow get their teeth into you. So we've gone from that, away from that. There is still listed that they want you to get a photograph of the snake. However, from all the research I've done and familiarization I've done, best practices are it really doesn't matter, because if you're bringing a snake bite in, the facilities in the region understand the snakes that are regional, and they understand what kind of antivenoms they should probably be using. And as far as we go for emergency pre-hospital care, our treatments are pretty generic, so we're all going to treat them the same anyway. Speaking of the antivenoms, understand too, this is where our observation of these patients, we're going to help to determine, more quickly than not, is it a neurotoxin, is it a cytotoxin, is it a hemotoxin, based on the signs and symptoms they're showing. And also with antivenoms, if your service is one that is carrying antivenoms with you, if you wouldn't mind just putting in the comments what it is or what agency you're with, and maybe just a real quick bullet point of the protocol and what you guys do for that, I'm generally curious. So we touched on this briefly earlier on. First and foremost, the thing is going to be to monitor the progression of the toxin as it's going through their body. So evaluations every 5 to 10 minutes. Again, marking the progression as to where it's going, what you're seeing, and then really sharp focus on their respiratory drive, whether they're in distress or if becoming paralyzed, which would be the hallmark sign of a neurotoxin having been introduced. If you are suspecting that it is a neurotoxin, again, if they're becoming paralyzed, they won't be able to use those muscles that are required for respiration to occur. Be ready to control their airway, whether it's going to be intubation, crike, eye gel, etc. Whatever you're doing, just be ready to and watching that airway for any signs of collapse. In keeping with the do no harm mantra, we don't want that toxin to be going, throughout the body. So we can also immobilize the extremity here if it does happen to be an extremity bite. This is like old school immobilization or classic immobilization. If there is a service out there still using air splints, obviously we don't want to utilize that. It will cause constriction, again, concentrating the venoms. So just your standard board splints, keep it, as still as possible. And then beyond that, aggressive pain management. So we all know the snake bites are going to be painful. One of the biggest things we can do to help our patients keep them relaxed, reduce PTSD from the event, is to get ketamine on board, get an opioid on board, or even Tylenol. Anything we can do to help treat their pain. So I kind of alluded to it a couple seconds ago. The definitive care for these people, again, is to get antivenom on board. Again, if your service allows you to do that, that's awesome. That is super progressive. Would really like to know further about that. But antivenom is what we want. There was some concerns early on. Well, hey, I don't know if this person's allergic to it, what have you. Again, the new generations of antivenoms are pretty much universal. So we understand the importance of getting that into them and letting that get to work. And quite honestly, the bad thing that could happen is that if they had an allergic reaction to the antivenom, they would go into anaphylaxis, which is our bread and butter as paramedics. 0.5 of epi, IM. We get ready for our epi drips if we need to, if it's prolonged. Obviously, Benadryl we would utilize, but that's down the road. The epi is the important thing to do. We're good at treating anaphylaxis. We know how to do it. So if you are able to give the antivenom within your jurisdiction, within your protocol, anaphylaxis is really the biggest thing we're going to have to concern ourselves with as far as an adverse reaction goes. So just food for thought here. In my state, blood is kind of the new thing, and we've recently gotten that. I'm curious if you're in an area that encounters snake bites, somewhat regularly. Are you able to give blood, or is there any discussion or pilot protocols for giving blood to snakebite patients if they're showing signs of hemorrhagic shock? So just to emphasize and reiterate, make sure if you're going out as a wildland medic or just a paramedic in an austere environment, period, make sure you do your due diligence in preparing yourself to deal with these situations. It's kind of crazy to think about. People you've never met, these fire crews, these hotshot crews, they automatically put their trust in you, in the fact that you are competent in your skills and prepared to handle anything that's thrown your way. And most importantly, for these patients that have had an envenomation incident, is consistent, constant monitoring of them to watch the progression of anything that's going on. Document all your findings, be aggressive with pain management, and be ready to take over their airway. We want to get an IV established as soon as we can, immobilize that extremity, and get them someplace where they can get the antivenom on board to actually physically treat the toxin that's in their system. It's Baltimore. There's some crazies in the street. The tunnels smell like piss, but all in all, it's not too bad of a place.